Hey, Gregory, good to see you. I think we are ready, and we're already live on Instagram. Vi er sgu live over det hele nu.
Okay.
Også på Insta.
Er der noget på, hvad har du sat den til at track dig, eller skal den...
Ja, det er bare autofokus.
Okay.
Ja, der er ikke noget...
Nej.
Men skal vi lige gå op og se, om der er flere, der står deroppe?
Jeg har lige været op og
Okay.
sat nogle af dine skilte deroppe også. Jeg kan godt lige gå en
Nå,
tur.
okay. Var der nogle skilte deroppe, siger du?
Nej, altså der er kommet skilte, og så tog
Nå,
bare nogle,
okay. Okay.
nogle flavor wheels, fordi de kender folk.
Ja. Men...
Er du ellers?
Ja, fordi det er ikke så mange.
Hvad?
Der er ikke noget. Vi kører.
Og hvordan... Du styrer det bare, ikke? Og
Jo,
jeg går
jo.
bare og fotograferer, eller så må du lige lave den her med fingre, hvis jeg skal gøre noget, ikke?
Jo.
Er det?
Super. Og de forreste borde er fyldt op. Og,
Jeg har flyttet den fra.
Ja. Så kører vi.
Skal jeg bare lukke døren, eller?
Yes. Jeg skal lige have min.
Vil du ikke have et glas vand op?
Jo, det vil være super.
Prøv at se, Morten, den står. Prøv at se her, den står og hopper rundt, men er det bare tracking, der? Fokusen der, og den bevæger sig lige.
Ja. Sådan der, så er slidet altid.
Ja.
Fedt, tak.
Yes.
That's true in many places, but wireless famous for being Chinese. But, I mean, Texas is great too. That's where Thames grew up. Where Thames grew up. She grew up in Houston, and her family did it. And it's great. And it really good. I think in many ways, all right. 8:30, I think we are ready. So I don't know if you just want to say a bit about your organization and why we do this together, just shortly. And one thing, this is live streamed, so just so that you know, that's why we have the camera, and that's also why if somebody says something, I'll pass you a microphone if that's okay.
Microphone.
It's on.
Okay. Well, so Morten asked Gregory and myself if during this World of Coffee we could organize a session, a talk. And yeah, we tried to organize. And when Morten asked us for the topics, I think the topics is fully in line with the question the community is asking about this new CVA. So I was very happy to support the talk, and with Gregory we try to push for this event. So we expected maybe more people, but I think we organized at the last minutes. So we're happy to have you here and maybe we will have somebody else coming. If you wait 5 minutes, we have a few friends that should come. So thank you, Morten, to have this talk, and I hope it will be a constructive discussion, because I think the goal is not to be black and white, but I will expect your talk.
Great. Thanks a lot. Yes, and talking about exactly what you're mentioning, we just talked about different topics, and the reason why we are off venue is I had 3 years in a row. I had 4 presentations for the SCA presentation, and none of them were taken, which there can be good reasons for, but at some point I just thought, well, I think I have something that is relevant for the community, so I'll just invest myself in rooms and having something to share. And we also do it live, so that the audience that couldn't make it here to Geneva is also can have a chance to listen in. I do have a very certain perspective of this, of course, and that's also the whole. I would say there are 2 angles. There are 2 kind of approaches I have to this. The first one is I'm concerned with coffee roasters. That's my audience. So I always evaluate things. Is this relevant or not? Are there some limitations for coffee roasters? That's kind of one angle. And another angle is that I'm a scientist. So I do peer review. When I do work, I get peer reviewed. And because I have 15 scientific publications now, I'm also a reviewer. So I often get scientific work, where I'm the reviewer because I'm the subject matter expert on that topic. So I'm used to seeing science that has some limitations. I actually, one of the things that I did for 5 years, I was teaching medical students to read scientific journals. So we had a pile of papers that we went through to find what does it say, what doesn't it say, what is the strength and weaknesses. So I'm very trained in looking at scientific work and then find the strength and weaknesses, because there are always weaknesses. There's no perfect design, but it's very important that there's a very specific thing that the research is about. So that's kind of my scientific. So in a sense, so you said let's keep this constructive. I keep this constructive by talking about the methodology, because basically I'm seeing, when I see the CVA system and see the white papers and the protocols, I'm the reviewer. Because if I don't, that's the whole point of a scientific review process, is that the experts are giving you honest feedback for the sake of the community. So I've tried several times. I spent years with some work, sent it for publication, and then I get some really harsh criticism. And the first couple of days, I'm annoyed. Don't they see the value in this? And that's small things. And then a week or 2 or 3 goes, and then we sit together in the research group. Actually, they are right. And then you go back to the drawing board, start again, and then the publication is much better because you got some really honest feedback from somebody who's experts in the field, who doesn't know you, so it's not personal. So this is about the methodology. And I keep this constructive by I'm only talking about scientific concepts. And I'm the last couple of years, I've really made a virtue out of I don't invent a thing myself. I don't want to invent anything. I just want to know, this is the problem. What state-of-the-art methodology do we have in science or philosophy that already answered this question? And let's use those, and don't add a single hair yourself, because then you get all the troubles that was solved by the state-of-the-art methodology being a classic. So that's how I work. So I'm looking at it from a scientist. If you're a scientist and you get some work for peer review, what you're looking for is how well is state-of-the-art applied in this work. And that's exactly how I I go to this. So the reason why SCA and CQI rub against Coffee Mind's approach is that we actually really want to help roasters build purposeful business based on scientifically proven methods and clear systems. When you want to scale something, it's very important that you have simple systems, that it's completely clear. Because once you get busy, if it's not really a simple, clear system you're working with, then you are scaling the problems. That's exactly if you have a franchise. You can't just, if you have a successful cafe, you can't scale it. You need to systematize it. You need to describe with the simplest possible elements, because otherwise you scale the problems. Very important point, and that's what and to be honest, I've been part of the education community since 2013 when I entered and started to do the roasting curriculum. And in 2015, when Ida joined, she was part of the creators group of the Sensory. So we've seen, I think, the biggest problem when the SCAE and SCAA merged was that it was an extremely anecdotal curriculum. People just wanted to come up with a new hype topic, and then we just had thousands and thousands of topics, and nobody knew what's the most important. It was, for people entering this, it was just a desert walk of thousands of things, and you never really felt that you got there. And that's my main problem with the education. So we have been working with this. So inside the SCA, but also outside, there's a lot of trainers coming up with, then it's rate of rise, then it's development time ratio, and then it's this and that. So people, that's the new thing, that's the new thing, that's the new thing. So everybody forgets what's the fundamentals, because there's so much hype in the education that few people are really, okay, forget about all the hype. What is the actual simple stuff that works? So I've been fighting that for many years, and I hope with the merger, and when I heard about the new CVA system, finally we get some science that can kind of scrape off all the kind of anecdotes and fluffy stuff that makes people just confused and following, I need to learn this, I need to learn that, and never really understand how to really get my business successful. Because that's what you care about, right? Your business needs to be successful. It's not your problem that somebody wants to kind of spend your time teaching you things that is a hype thing, but doesn't really move the needle for you, right? So that's time wasted for the individual businesses. And that's why I think clear systems and sensory proven methods is really important. So we really spent many years trying to keep people outside of pseudoscience, confusing and wide and overcomplicated systems. And that's when I saw the protocols of the new CVA, I thought, okay, do we now we also need to fight the organization? It's just, when does this stop? So that was just, I think that's, so this is not personal, it's it's the method, and the method up against state of the art, with the sake of saving people's time so they can spend their mind with their own business rather than worrying about what somebody else think they should learn. So, yeah. Because it's all about people's self-confidence. Do you feel competent and confident? Those two things are going together. So we really do our best to teach people to fish and don't give them a fish. And I feel that with these systems, there's a lot of assumptions nobody knows, but you can take a long course to learn how to fill it out, but you never really understand what you're doing. That doesn't give you confidence, and that doesn't make you feel competent in executing on your business. So it's just about, this is where I come from. I've come from coffee roasting and sensory science, and as a scientist, I'm constructive because I go straight for the method and not for anything else, really. I see myself as an engineer and a scientist to really scrape all off the fluff and what's left. So Newton's laws, for example, it's very simple, right? You can have a lot of models of the physical universe, but kind of Newton, he kind of 3 laws, and then he can tell you exactly how much fuel to put in a rocket and what angle and velocity, and you'll get to the moon with 3 simple laws, right? That's simplicity that works. Yeah, so I've worked with Ida for 10 years. Unfortunately, we had to give up making it a business. I kind of hoped to jump on the new trend of sensory, but that didn't really work. So she is now with the Novonesis, the coolest biotech company in Denmark, food biotech company, and she's the international sensory scientist. And I hired her as a student 10 years ago. So I'm really proud, and but she is still, we're still hanging out once a month for a cup of coffee, and she is still getting royalties for her books and e-learning systems. So she is a coffee mind sensory scientist in her spare time. You probably already know this, the few people who showed up here. I've been teaching more than 2,000 individuals in small groups of 6 to 8 since 2007. So I've been teaching thousands of coffee roasters in small groups. So I'm very, very familiar with the needs of people and the confusion, the level of confusion people come with. I need to spend the first half day brainwashing people from all the hype models, the latest trends, and really get them back to some simplicity that works. And I've consulted a lot and have several scientific papers and been running many projects at the university for many years, and many of them are scientifically published. So just to make sure that this is reflected up against state-of-the-art methodology. So in sensory science, you've got, this is called, in engineering, it's called a stage gate model. This is an experimental design. It's not an observational design that I would claim the CVA is. You can put it into an experimental design for sure, but in most cases it will be used in observational, where you're not actually asking a question that you get answered in a prospective, randomized manner. But that's state-of-the-art descriptive analysis. That's actually an experiment, not just an observation. So you are actually trying to learn something. And this is what I think, where I think it's important for businesses. You are trying to learn, what does my customers appreciate? Should I bury myself for a month to experiment with drum speed? Should I bury myself another month to experiment with airflow? There's no answer to that question. But so people do that. But if we had mapped that out, we could use the stage gate model to find out, does it even make a difference? Does it even make a difference? That's the most fundamental question in science. It's actually called the zero hypothesis in a statistical model. So if somebody has a kind of model and somebody comes with another parameter, hey, this parameter, you put it into the model and then you check the zero hypothesis, does it even move the outcome? And most of the hype things in the coffee community doesn't move the outcome, but it's taught because it's an extra slides, it's an extra piece of the curriculum, we can make more money training. So the zero hypothesis is really what you need to answer first, and you can do that in a cheap way with a triangulation. That's the cheap kitchen way of asking the zero hypothesis, does it even make a difference? Because you want to waste a lot of time in the very expensive descriptive analysis if there's no difference anyway. You are also testing if there's a difference in the descriptive analysis, but that's the expensive way of doing it, and that's the p-values that you would see in the data. So the p-values are very important for the data quality, and you have a cheap kitchen way of testing if it's even worth describing the differences. And that's because in a sensory descriptive analysis, it's the differences that you are looking at, not how they are tasting. Because how they are tasting, that's more like an observational study, like the coffee lexicon. That's an observational study that is not complete, and it's not meant to be complete, but it's kind of a good collection of possible descriptors you could use for some projects. But if you have some coffees where you need some references that's not in the coffee lexicon, a sensory scientist would just go to supermarkets and find the one relevant for the samples and not really worry about it not being in the lexicon. So the lexicon is more like something you could use if it's relevant for your project. It's a great work, but it's an observational study. It's not an experiment. So an experiment, you are pursuing a question that is relating to the differences amongst the samples. And that's how basically, and I'll show you that later on a slide, that's how sensory science was kind of lifted out of the anecdotal observational study as a research design and into the prospective trials, randomized trials that we see in the medical sciences. So the whole point is it's a stage gate model. You cannot skip the first one because then you end up with noise. That's your noise gate in an engineering. It's like if you kind of go into a rocket that goes to the moon, there are some stages you cannot skip. The safety, you don't do the safety later. You do the safety before igniting the rocket. And this is where I fear with the new CVA system, there's no kind of safeguard between describing sets of samples where there are no relevant differences. So you can create a lot of information that's never really tested for the zero hypothesis. Does it even make sense, the data that we're creating? So that's one of the things. And then there's the, this is the laboratory. You can see here you are describing the properties of the coffee in the lab. Once you've done that, you know your products, and then you can go out in the real world and service for people and see how preferences correlate with sensory properties. And this is the big positive aspect of the new CVA, that they started to do this distinction. Because for years I was kind of fighting the whole Q system with, you are confusing your own preferences with properties of the product. Preferences is measurement of people's preferences. It's not the properties of the coffee. So, but all of a sudden, they've been defending that for 25 years, and then all of a sudden they changed their minds. So now I don't have to prove that, talk about that point, because now they adopted the CVA just out of the blue. So now that problem is not that big anymore. But it's very important. This is a stage gate model, and it's very important not to skip any of them. Yeah.
Just a question.
I have just a question, so thank you to propose that, but can you just explain what kind of judges you need for each test? Because I always, during my talks or my education, I always mention that for discriminative tests we need expert judges, so and for descriptive as well, and naive judges for the preferences. Is it something, or if you need non-trained panelists or judges for the discriminative test, you need a huge number of persons to reduce the variability. Is it something you agree with that, or because we never speak about these trained judges? And for the CVA, for example, one of my concerns was the affective is done by trained people, and then we know that trained people have biased to do objective evaluation.
I understand your question, and I agree. There is a bit of so the point is not if people are professional. The point is if people are skilled. It doesn't matter what certificate they have, but if they are skilled. But because of statistics, you can test that. And I'll show you that later with the software, how this is tested. So I can tell you the way we even got to this place was more than 10 years ago. That was actually Christian Hansen. That's the company IDA is in now. It's just changed its name to Novonesis. And we were hired to participate in a sensory descriptive analysis. And we were the coffee experts helping them out with that. And then we found out that a week before, the sensory scientist, her husband got ill with cancer. So she just left everything. So a few days before, or actually a week before, we found out that there was only a few from the professional panel, like 6 people or something like that. And we need at least 12 to make sure to get good data. So we thought either we cancel the project or we find a solution. So what we did, we took in people from the coffee community. No certificates, just people from the coffee community. And we screened them with the ISO screening test that's normal for the panel. And then we also just ran a test with them, and then we could stratify and see if they were more or less good than the professionals, and they were as good. And you can measure that in the variability and discriminability. So that's something you can just test people. So when we do sensory analysis in CoffeeMind, we have the local people from the community, and then I also found out that there are a few people at the office who has got really good taste buds and give good data. So it's not a question about title or business cards, it's a question about skills, and you can measure that. So that's the good thing about, so you can train them, but you can train them, the way to really see if you should include, if they are good enough is to see what kind of data they create. And this is a big thing with the naive, and that's also a big problem I have with the new CVA, that the only thing these people can tell you if they like it or not. They've got no idea about the quality of anything. So using the quality concept here is a complete deviation from the whole point of this stage gate model. So as you can see here, it can be done very simply, right? In order to prove that you can taste the difference between two samples, that's another way of testing people. And I found out that Actron 10, for example, is a really good skilled professionals. They can taste the difference between Actron 10. And then I found that even people at the course, some of them has sensitivity thresholds between 30 and 40 Actrons, which is really high. But you can do a lot of tests of people's skills, and you can also, once you know their skills, then you can start to, of course, use them in your panel. But this is a quick test, right? And statistically, you just need to have 4 out of 4 triangles correct to have a p-value below 5. No software needed, no complicated forms to fill out. That's just something to know. It's the binomial distribution. If you have 8 cups, it's 6 out of 8 you need correct to have a p-value below 5. So if you use the competition format, yeah? Oh, just a second.
That's just for the live stream.
Would you mind to move as close up as possible?
For sure. I have a question regarding triangulation, because you mentioned that it could be a great first starting point, but typically in triangulation, I'm from the industry, I'm talking about the daily basis. You need not just a p-value, you need an alpha value, beta value, and power. And depending on that is the number of panelists that you need to prove that the people is doing a real discriminant test. So it's not just 10 people. We need more than, I don't know, in our case, probably we run short because we don't have enough panelists to prove our beta and our alpha value.
I understand. So it's the risk of making type 1 or type 2 errors, yeah. Right? But it depends on the size difference, sensory size difference between the samples. If you have big differences, you will get low p-values with few people. If you have small differences, you need a huge amount of people to get a low p-value. It's like if you have a medical test, for example, if you give a pill to 10 people and they all report that the headache is completely disappeared, then you don't need more data, right? That could be something with genetics and so on. But if you can see that 9 out of 10 reports a lowered headache, you're thinking, okay, I might actually, it could be a coincidence, or there's an effect that will be proven if I have a bigger audience. So that's what you're talking about, right?
Yes, but in sensory science, for instance, our customers always ask about the alpha and beta value more than just the p-value. So for instance, if you see the statistical books, you can find different statistical tables regarding the alpha value, the beta value, and the power, because at least for a triangle test, you have the 33.3% of guessing. This is the statistical. So when we report triangle tests in general for the industry, it is not too much valuable when we are trying to prove product match, for instance. Sometimes we need to run a degree of difference or other tetrad that is more strong in statistical, just talking about the triangle test.
Yeah. Yeah, so first of all, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's called a power analysis, but it's something you do before you do the study. So you budget. It's a way to budget a project. How many participants do we need to prove what we want to prove? So in a power test, you'd say, what is the relevant difference that I'm looking for? What is the expected variability in the data set? And there's a third factor I don't remember. But those are the things that you budget your study up against, and that's the alpha and beta, but that is the budgeting. The p-values are something that you get after the study. So the power analysis is to make sure you're not wasting your time and increasing the probability that that you have the budget you need to find the differences here that you're looking for. So I understand what you mean with the and what I said here is that this p-value is something that if people get this, it's the skills that we are testing. If I'm asking about the product differences, then you're right. Then I need to do a complete power analysis and then we need a lot of people. But so it's the difference. Are you looking at the skills of the people, or are you looking at the product properties? Because if you're looking at the product properties, then you need to do the power budgeting before. But if you're just training people, then this is enough to prove that they can taste the difference, that this individual can. So that's another way of looking at it. You can look at the skills or the product level. And
diagram says that you're looking at the product. Coffee at the top, not the individual.
That's true. That's true. So my point here is that the example here is that it's a pretty simple setup. But if you want to, and I normally train people, there are two aspects, because if you prove that people find a difference or don't, you need to know their skills before answering that. And I've actually made a complete software doing exactly this. So it's a longer talk. So it can be, but you're right. This was just to show people that you can answer this question in a very simple way, and you can have different amounts of triangles or less, more or less. So it was just an example from measuring the training. So my point is a descriptive analysis. We've done this. There's no reason to talk into two. If people what to put on my bag, right? If you're developing products and you want to have a product range, what to put on my bag, right? So I just tell people, take any flavor wheel, put it on a table, have cups with numbers, taste them, and place the cards, and then you have a descriptive analysis. It's inspired by something called napping. So you can do this quick and dirty. You don't need scientific data for this, for putting things on the bag, and it's pretty reliable data. If you wanted to prove this, the napping procedure is that you do this as a panel, and then later you serve the exact same, but every person has their own station. And to the degree that they make non-random decision, when you compare the panel performance, then you actually have good data. And so it can be as simple as this. If you see it from the practical aspect of a coffee roaster who just wants to put something not completely random on their bags, right? And then when you serve something, when you have an experiment, right, then it's just a question about what thermo empties first. No spreadsheet, no advanced things, because this is the essence. How well do they like it? Give them a small cup of each, and the one you prefer, you can get a full cup, and the empty kind of thermal that empties first is the winner. This is if you have a homogeneous, if it's just one office you measure. You can also stratify so that you can get data from people, so that you know where they are from, if it's a company, if it's the marketing department or the production, and then you can start to stratify in the different departments which one. But again, my point here is that this is so logical and intuitive, and this is the basis of the idea from Rosemarie Pangborn, that this is real behavior. I mean, it's really fundamental, just like Newton's law, right? Of course, you can add advanced statistics on top of these questions. You can add, if you calculate a lot of data. You need to some advanced statistics to really make sure that you understand what you're doing. But the fundamental questions and the fundamental answers are simple. If you've got a lot of data, it's complexity because you have a lot of data, but the fundamental things that you are testing doesn't deviate from the really fundamental questions and types of answer. Then I have this slide that just kind of shows that. So I don't like the term subjectivity at all. I think we should take that completely out of when talking about sensory science, because that is just a smoke bomb of confusion. So I would say that people use subjectivity in their language about sensory data doesn't understand what science is and what sensory science is, because it's objective data. I might actually explain this slide first. So in theory of science, the subject is the scientist, and the object is the object that the method of choice is investigating. This is actually down to phenomenology, Husserl. If you heard about him, he's the person I prefer to talk about when talking about consciousness and the scientific methodology. So, because he talks about intentionality, all knowing happens in a subject-object split. Everything that happens if you're looking at your emotions or if you're looking at a person outside, the whole kind of way the knowing is structured is that there's a subject that knows something about an object, and the object might as well be an emotion. So the object for the scientist in sensory science is the person tasting the coffee. That's how you get information about the coffee, through a person. So it's not subjective data, it's objective because of the methodology used. The objectivity rests in the method. So there's a lot of burden on the method. That's why I don't want to invent my own method. I don't trust myself to come up with something new. I just want to use the state-of-the-art methods that's already proven by somebody else to be the classics. So the methodology is guaranteeing the objectivity. And the object is the person tasting, set in the methodology that guarantees you objective data. So you can have in sensory science, you can have two different types of data. You can have intensity data or you can have preference data. Both of them are objective data because the methodology and the whole, that's my point here, that if you have a light and a dark roast and we get 20 random people over here, and just have perhaps just quickly calibrate them for bitterness and acidity to make sure they know what it is. They would all agree that, okay, the light roast is most acidic, right? That's an intensity judgment. But if you ask the same group of people which one they like, you might get different answers. And the reason why this is objective is because this is a method. If I did this to the same group of people, or Gregory did it to the same group of people, we would get the same result. That is the objectivity. The objectivity rests in the methodology, and this is why this comes from logical positivism, where they talked a lot about objective methods. And the whole point was, and that's why we have in scientific journals, that you explain exactly what was the research question, how did you do it, how did you calculate it. Because, and this comes from logical positivism, the whole point is if you hand this paper to somebody else, if they did the same, if the results in the research is true, they will get the same results. So that's why we go through so much effort in the scientific journals to explain how we did it, because the underlying assumption is if it's true what I found, somebody else would find the same. That's the objectivity. So I think it's really confusing because what lies behind this concept of subjectivity? Oh, it's unreliable, there's a lot of variation and so on. But there's variation in everything. Try to forecast the weather. Try to make an engine run. If you need a rocket to go, there's a lot of vibrations that you need to control. There's variation, so there's nothing special about sensory data. Nothing. And if we keep telling people, oh, it's subjective and it's unreliable, and it's then we are not using state-of-the-art philosophy and science. So yeah, what we've used for many years when we do, it's just to show you how simple it can be done. I've done this for many years when I have clients and I go and need to find green coffee for a client. I have just a business card per sample I'm tasting, and then I have all the categories from our flavor wheel, basic taste, and then I have a suitability, not quality. How suitable is this coffee for the product that I'm looking for? And then I can have three ones. Because here you have the descriptive analysis, and then you've got the purpose that you put in up against each other. So if you have a Brazilian, and you really want a Brazilian that is low in acidity, and you find a Brazilian that is very high in acidity, you would say it's very high in acidity and fruitiness, but it's not very suitable for what I'm looking for. Whereas if it was a Kenyan that was very acidic, it would be very suitable. But it comes down to what is my purpose? What am I looking for? And I don't need to fill them all out. I'm just filling out the ones that I think is relevant for me to remember why did I score the suitability as I want, because having to fill out everything out is a waste of your time. And the more data you have with less purpose, the more confused you are. So I'm very, just fill out what you think makes sense, because then it's your data. And you understand what you're doing. So that's the competency model of Coffee Mind, where we have coffeepreneur, personal vision, control, experimentation, evaluation, and the consumer, and then everything is kind of embedded in lean operation, where you need to minimize waste up in the light of what you're trying to achieve. So waste is a big thing for Coffee Mind, and that's also where I'm looking at this model. Where are we wasting time? Where are we not adding information that's needed in the business model? If it's not needed in your business model, don't spend a second on doing it, because it's a waste of your time. So this is how it could look like. Yeah, so the whole point is that sensory science, as I mentioned, rests on some really simple questions in a stage-gate model with really simple answers. So you can see here, discriminative, descriptive, and hedonic. And the simple answer is, which one is the odd cup? And yes, of course, you need to calculate how many triangles you need to find the difference you're looking for and all that. So do your power analysis before, if you're looking at products. But it's really simple questions and simple answers, right? There's nothing weird about this. Find the odd cup. Everybody understands what they're doing. And in descriptive, score things on a scale. And in affective, also score things on a scale, but only what is your preference? That's the simple question. This is the thing you want to know. You can add more to a consumer study, but this is the essence. This is the essence. Everything else is something that can kind of just back it up, but in most cases you should actually skip it because it just adds confusion. And this is where, as a sensory scientist, I was really excited when I heard about the kind of the visions for the CVA, but I must admit that I felt like this 5 years later when I saw the protocols, not the intentions and the vision, but when I saw the protocols, I just felt like I couldn't believe that this is something. This is kind of something I would see from students, and I've been teaching a lot of students who doesn't have the scar tissue of a bad, inconclusive data set. It really hurts to spend a lot of time getting data and doing a lot of work, and then you just have no conclusions. I've done that a lot, and I've also disproven myself using sensory science in 2013. I had something I've been teaching for 5 years at London School of Coffee on how body is related to the development time, and I've been convincing thousands of students that I was right. So if I just had this closed loop of getting improvement from my students, I could have been running these claims for 20 years. But when I find out that there was something called sensory science, I was lucky enough to get a free, normally the street price for 6 samples is like 15,000 euros. So I got that for free, gave in my samples, and they didn't find anything that I've been teaching. So I thought, okay, this is really the way to go forward, because this works, right? It actually disproves me in a way so I've been doing this a lot. So so it's out of kind of pain that I understand that it's so important to be extremely specific. What is it that I want to know, and what data should I collect to actually answer that? And I just felt that if it's true that the new CVA works across also for roasters and baristas, I was really disappointed, and I felt like this. Because the descriptive, I think it's great that we have these scales, for sure. The 15 point is inspired by the state of the art as it's done at the universities with a 15 centimeter scale. And the way of using the kata in this form is a bit the same as kind of putting papers or numbers on flavor wheels. It's a binary decision, right? So that's great, but the bitterness for me is a huge thing in roasting and brewing. So this is something that kind of took me a few minutes we need to change this, right? And we are on year 5 and 6, and one of the basic tastes, actually the most important basic taste, I think consumers, if this is actually trying to capture value, consumers, this is actually something I haven't proven scientifically, but I want to venture that the consumers, they don't know what they like. They don't know to put words on it, but they can tell you how much they like it on a scale from 1 to 9. I think you could set up a study that would prove that the modulation of acidity and bitterness would be the biggest drivers of preferences and therefore value in coffee. And isn't that very logical? If you go to kind of a specialty coffee place or Starbucks, the biggest difference is bitterness and acidity, and you can kind of make the whole staircase from Starbucks to specialty by modulating only bitterness and acidity, right, in reverse direction. So I think that's really, I don't know what's tested that made this go from beta to actually release, if this made it to release with just a tick box for bitterness. Simply the data set I don't understand. And there's something that's extremely important, and this goes back to my frustration of have been teaching for so many years. One of the things that I'm really fighting is over complexity. And I think is it called alluring thing in complexity is, it's not wrong. So you can have a lot of models that are not wrong, but are still a waste of time if they are overcomplicated. And I think here the heliocentric and the geocentric model of our solar system is a great example here. Because if you assume that the sun is in the center, you have close to circles or ellipses, but it's really simple math. You can also assume that the Earth is in the center, in which case you get a perfectly predictable mathematical model that is just a bit overcomplicated. And this is my point. If we want people to start businesses as specialty coffee roasters, if they would, do you think we will get the most successful community if we teach them with this strategy or that strategy? None of them are wrong. So this is kind of what I think science, every time there's been a breakthrough in science, it's because people have been thinking like this. What is the few fundamental elements here that explains the system the best? And then when you have these breakthroughs, that's Newton's, that's Einstein, Niels Bohr, Rosemary Pangborn, Then all of a sudden, when marketing comes in, they use the language of this, and then they kind of want to keep people's attention for hours because there's a lot of money in that, right? So there's a tendency. So I think we have an accumulated. This is what the curriculum looks like right now, worldwide. For 50 years, this has been done. So how can people not waste time and quickly get a successful business if this is the landscape of education? And this is where I think science can really scrape off, and this is the zero hypothesis. We just need to kind of roll the zero hypothesis over this overpopulated system and get back to the breakthroughs that makes these a classic in the first place. And this is every time you go into an airplane, or a space rocket, or your own car, it's because people have not fallen into the overcomplication and it works, right? The car doesn't explode because this is engineering, right? Every element is in a compartment, and every element is really simple. It's so simple, but the trick is the system, how it works together. I can change the battery in my car and I know nothing about it. Why can I do that? That's because somebody has built this car so things are not interfering. So that's my point. If you are starting with taking rosemary pangborns and kind of take this and make a little modification, take that and make a little modification, you're creating noise, and that would create your motor would explode. You cannot scale something that is not very clear and simple, just like in the franchise model. And this is where I think, you've got the classics, and they are classics for a reason. So I really think it's very dangerous to think that I'll take the classics and then I'll just add a little of my own, right? It's very dangerous, because what you end up is with something that, it's not that it doesn't work. Remember, overcomplicated models doesn't give you nothing. They give you something. But if you stick with the classics and really do it exactly as it's done, you get nicer work and you are more efficient, you get more work done. But if you're kind of mingling things in a way and kind of adding a bit of your own, it's not that you don't get data. You just get less good data, and it's a more messy result. So it's not, again, the alluring thing with overcomplication is not that it's wrong. It's just that it's extremely inefficient. And it's really difficult, really dangerous to scale. And it's not good for the community. The community wastes a lot of time. So you can see here, this is the descriptive form of the CVA, and this is the input page in my software. Well, I'm not selling software. I actually created software since last year where I can do plan triangulation tests, and I can plan descriptive tests, and also consumer tests in sessions where that starts of a blank page. But I'll show you that later. But the whole point is that this is simplicity, this is not. It's not that you can't create data from this, but if you have a difference that's there, but not very big, you would find it with bigger probability here than with that. That's data quality. So it's not that you couldn't use it, it's just that you would more often run into an inconclusive, a big p-value with this than that, even if it's the same object of investigation. So it's about the data quality. How quickly do you get a low p-value? So in a sense, you can say in your power analysis, you need a bigger amount of people to get the same p-value for the same data set that you could get away with a simpler model. So it's not that you can't use it, and it's not wrong, but it's just more expensive because it's more noisy and bigger variation. So that's the difference between something doesn't have to be wrong to be a bad model. And you can see here in my software, when we score 4 samples, this is what the consumer sees. And this is the effective form of the CVA. The time it takes and the assumptions. I don't know what consumers think about quality. And I have no idea what a consumer would think about the quality of aftertaste. A consumer has got no idea, and that goes back to what you said, consumers are naive. Consumers, the whole idea...
The effective form isn't for consumers.
Sorry?
The effective form is not for consumers.
But that's the whole point with Rosemary Pangborn's model, that the effective is consumer measurement.
No, the effective is the consumer, in this case, is the coffee buyer. Remember the CVA?
No, but then it's not across the coffee chain. Then this is not a model for the value perceived across the whole coffee chain. Then it's a model that you kind of should be only...
You're saying that you can't use effective scores with experts.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that Rosemary Pangborn's model...
This is an effective form for use by experts. That's what that is.
But why is it then rolled out as relevant for everybody? Because they...
It's not, well, it's a green coffee grading system.
But what about the roasters and baristas? What are they supposed to learn then?
Well, they can adapt things like this.
But if it's not made for them and relevant...
If you read the protocol, it's pretty clear that this is for assessing green coffee. We're very clear about that. It's not for espresso.
But
for
Peter, it's not
evaluating
sold like
espresso.
that. It might be mentioned, but when the value is
Okay,
not guesswork.
okay. Regardless of what you understood, I'm making it clear to you now that this effective form is not for consumers. It is for experts.
But then it completely violates Rosemary Pangborn's point.
What was Rosemary's Pangborn's point?
Because the value is not created with the person grading it as a coffee buyer. It's valued in the coffee shop.
I'm
or
not saying you
at
can't
home.
do consumer research. I'm saying this is a form not designed. If I was designing a consumer form, it would look more like the one on the right. That's fine. But if Rosemary Pangborn, let's say, were designing a form to be used by experts, I think it would look more like the effective form.
But for experts, that's not part of her model. That's kind of making your own little tweak.
Then you're saying that Rosemary, not to make, you guys probably may not realize that Rosemary Pangborn is considered the founder of modern sensory science in the 60s and 70s. One of her students, Jean-Xavier Guinard, has built on her, and he's the guy that occupies her professorship now at UC Davis. He's applied the same principles to experts, using experts who evaluate olive oil, experts who evaluate wine, experts who evaluate citrus, and has found that by using the same consumer tools that you might use for the final consumer, but using those for experts, they can work very well. And in fact, the Pangborn Symposium that happens every 2 years, it's a sensory science conference, I've been invited to present this work, the coffee value assessment, at the Pangborn Symposium for exactly this reason. Because the innovation that we made with the coffee value assessment is that you can use the 9-point hedonic scale for coffee experts. Because coffee experts, our job as coffee experts, you're a coffee expert, I'm a coffee expert, our job is to understand consumer preferences and apply them to the coffees that we...
But you don't do that by guessing.
I don't do that by guessing.
I do that by Peter, my point
experience.
is that we've been doing this for, I don't know, 300 people at a course at a roastery called Contra in Copenhagen. And we have 8 very different coffees, all the way from pure Robusta and a low-grade Arabica blend, pulp natural Brazil, and all the way up to Panama Geishas and all that.
Sure.
And then we start asking people, what's good coffee for you, and what do you think you like? And then some people would say, I like dark roasted coffee, and others would say, I like light roasted coffees. And I think in closer to 50%, and we'll get data on this soon, we'll send out, people actually have the opposite. People have no idea. And if you, as an expert, think you can guess what consumers think, that's the value of Rosemary's model, that don't guess, ask, but don't ask verbally, ask with interacting with a product. And if the model doesn't take that into account, the true value is not explored. It might mean that you get good enough proxy data for some questions, but there's a huge gap.
But I don't want to derail you too much, but let me just give you a small counter to that, and then we can move on. When you're a coffee buyer having to buy a coffee, when you're running a roasting company and you're saying, I need to buy more coffee to get me through the next 6 months, and you've got 10 coffees that you have to choose from, you can't run a consumer study on each of those 10 coffees. You have to use your own knowledge of the consumer that you sell to in order to make decisions.
Why? I mean, it depends on the kind of the links.
If I have to buy coffee from my roasting company, I can't say, please, importer, send me the samples. I roast the samples. I do a consumer study to tell me which coffees I should buy. That would be incredibly difficult to do. We have a process in coffee where we have these people called coffee buyers. I worked as a coffee buyer for a long time. My job was to understand my consumers so that I bought coffees that conform to their state. Now, I can use
But
I can
wouldn't you
use consumer studies
calibrate
to
up
learn
against real consumer data then once in a while?
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's my point.
I agree.
But this is not very. It's not clear for us seeing the system that there is a big gap from this and to the consumer. That's not clear, and there are really simple ways you can actually fix that by just telling people. It's very important not to try, because it seems like here the message is, you can just assume, right? If I got this in my roastery, and I was told to use this, and I'm not asked to kind of ask my customers, but just kind of try to assume things, then it's not very clear for me how this is related.
Yeah.
Why is there even quality of aftertaste? Is that even something that's necessarily a thing for a consumer? Where's all that research, how that links the proxy intermediate stage and the real consumers? Where's that link?
You're asking about aftertaste. Where's the link between?
Actually, the general model, where aftertaste is an example.
Well, we've done consumer studies, and we know what you can do a lift analysis, right, on liking, and a penalty analysis, and see what attributes consumers tend to like about coffees, and what attributes consumers tend to. And of course, as
Where's
you know,
that research?
I'll give you an example.
But it's not published, right?
Yeah, the filter coffee research that we did on the
where's it
brewing control
published?
chart. It's brewing in food and
Sorry?
quality science. I'll send it to you. It's the one we did at UC Davis on the
the filter.
the filter
Breville,
coffee, yeah.
Sponsored.
yeah. That's
Does that answer this question very clearly?
well, it
Because I read that study and I didn't see that.
well, yeah, no. I mean, those heat maps were based on consumer preferences, and there were 3 clusters of consumers, right? One whose primary motivator was you described the inverse relationship between bitterness and acidity, and that, I agree with you, that applied to 2 of our clusters. Our 3rd cluster was motivated mostly by sweetness, their perception of sweetness. So there you have 3 consumer groups, and who are motivated by different sensory attributes that are measured by the CVA, and that's why we did it. That's furthermore, because we saw that motivation by sweetness, we went on to do a study about sweetness to see what could be perceived, etc. So I think I agree with you that effective form is not suitable for consumer research, but a simplified version would be. You could use a single 9-point scale, just as you have.
I think this one is, for me, what makes sense.
Sure.
But what doesn't make sense is that it's still a quality. What's quality?
Impression of
consumer-
quality is defined as a coffee that seems high quality to you or a market known to you.
But that's just a concept that's completely not part of Rosemary Pangborn's model. Quality and consumers, they are naive. It's a concept. You don't give them concepts. Just ask what they like. It's not just the same, and it's about the scalability and the precision of the elements. You can't just kind of make something and then think that it creates good data. I'm not convinced about that. It's kind of, and this is why I think that, well, it's only for green coffee buyers, but it's kind of sold as everybody needs to know it.
I don't think
Why-
it's sold like that. Yeah.
You don't think it's
I don't think it is.
sold as something everybody should take?
I don't think it is.
You don't think it is?
No.
Okay.
I mean, the only class we teach at SCA is called CVA for cuppers. That's the only class that we teach. We don't teach any barista classes on CVA or anything. I mean,
No, I know, but
we encourage people
sold
to
as
learn
being
about it.
relevant for the whole chain where it isn't, because Rosemary Pangbon's model is relevant for the whole chain. It is. So using her model and not being clear about where it kind of it's like cafe owners took Q grader courses, because if you succeed marketing things enough, people think it's relevant for them.
Yeah,
if you're not clear about where it stops, and it's not clear how this relates to the old sensory course, for me, I think the points that is made here should just kind of be integrated in the curriculum we already have. It's just a few additions, a few more slides. It's not a whole new thing.
Right.
Because
So-
that's the confusion, right? Because if it's true that it should only be for some, why don't you just put it into the existing system under sensory and green coffee, and don't bother the whole roasting community with something? I think there's a discrepancy between what you're saying and how it's sold.
Okay. I don't want to waste everybody's time, but I disagree with you.
Okay, this is a bit about the evidence hierarchy, and this is, I can feel, and I did a podcast episode about this, and what annoys me here is that, and this is from medical statistics, right, that you've got, and I actually created this as a response to, because I saw Roaster Cat, an Instagram person I follow and really like. She did some experiments with coffee roasting and did some tasting. And I thought, I really love that she is doing that. But as a scientist, of course, I would like to have a bit more rigorousness. So how do I actually talk with her about this, or how do I think about this? Because I thought that she provided value, even though it was not state-of-the-art kind of methodology and statistics. And I thought, actually, there's something called the evidence hierarchy. And in the beginning, you've got expert experience, observations, and opinions. And these are highly valuable. It's easy to say that's just coffee people. They don't know what they are doing. They just talk and they overcomplicate things. But there are actually a lot of observations without which researchers wouldn't have interesting questions. So the value of the community is all the observations, but the value is kind of sifted with the meeting the scientific community. So you can see we've got expert experience, observation of opinions. The data strength is not really high. It's simple sums and averages. You've seen these blog posts where people have observed TDS and doing stuff. There's no mean standard errors and p-values. That's okay, but they've spent some time really trying to understand something. And then that could make it to a blog post, right? And you can see there's a price and time investment. So it's very valuable that you quickly do a kitchen experiment. If you have an idea, do a kitchen experiment before investing in the big project, right? Because you learn a lot. And that's also actually the idea behind Rosemary Pangbon's model. Start with seeing if there's a difference at all before you invest in the more expensive. And then it could be prospective or retrospective data. We'll talk about that later. But the important thing is here you can only talk about correlation because there's a lot of unknown biases and confounders, which is okay, but that's just, there's a price and a benefit, right? A cost benefit that goes for the price and the quality of the data that you get. And then you can go to something called cross-sectional studies where you have really skilled statisticians looking at huge data sets and trying to kind of cluster it and see if there's something that correlates. It's really advanced statistics. And that's a bit more expensive because you need to hire scientists, right? And then you've got something called case control studies. It's a bit the same, but the whole point is that it's retrospective. So you're looking at data sets that are already created, so you don't need to invest in collecting data, which is expensive. So you can quickly get a lot of information. It's still only correlation because it's not an experiment, right? And then you've got retrospective cohort studies where you're looking at groups that already has a medical condition or not, or has experienced something. And then you've got something called prospective studies, where you actually create some groups that you are following, but you cannot randomize them because the randomization of a cohort is expensive, and sometimes it's not possible. And this is where the research in lung cancer and smoking had a problem for many years, because you can't do randomized trials. Because if you had to do that, you would have to say, I have a group of people, mixture of smokers and non-smokers, but we'll just randomize you. So here, first of all, I'll lie first person, and then you throw a dice. If it's 1, 2, 3, you need to smoke the next 2 months, and if it's 4, 5, 6, you shouldn't, right? So if it's a non-smoker and you force them to smoke, or if it's a smoker that you force to not smoke, there's a lot of things you cannot do in medical science because you cannot randomize for ethical reasons. They didn't have that problem under the in concentration camps, so there's a lot of interesting research coming out of those. But that's seriously, from a technical perspective, that's a difference, because there's an ethical reason that we're not, of course, doing that. So, but the great thing is that we don't have the problem with coffee. It's not an ethical problem to roast things dark, even so some people might say. So we don't have that problem. So we can make perfectly prospective randomized controlled trials where we actually allowed to talk about causality. So the causality is the holy grail of science as such, and the huge breakthrough for Rosemary Pangborn was that he elevated something that people thought this is just subjective to the most prestigious research design in medical sciences and engineering, so that we were allowed to actually look for causality. And then you've got meta-analysis, where you are looking at a group of trials where you have where you extract the statistics into one big database, and this is really what annoys me, that I think with the CVA I feel that we're kind of back a bit to the first, because I don't think the quality of the fundamental distinctions in the model is honoring the breakthrough that sensory science actually was, because I think there's a lot of unclear things that makes it kind of deviate from the state of the art, so that we're kind of back to a more simple sums and averages. Of course we can do some more advanced stuff, but it's not really built for that, because if it was, you wouldn't have added things that risk you get an inconclusive study. All right, so so a descriptive sensory analysis is a study where you actually randomize your samples. So you have subsamples that you randomize, and then you have a panel that has their own random sequence through the samples, and is scoring only descriptors that a pre-panel has selected that is relevant for the samples at hand. That's very important for the that's why, because we're looking for causalities. We're not trying to just describe things. We're actually trying to understand deeper what some fundamental stuff. That's the point of a descriptive analysis, where it's the relative differences that are important. So you cannot have a pre-populated form, because then you might waste time on things that doesn't matter, and completely miss something that would have given you a conclusive difference. So this is what it looks like at the university, but with our software, we can do this just by gathering people in a room and do it like this, where we have randomized cups here, and you can see some of them are she is from marketing. She creates great data, and people just scan this code and they score, and also for Coffee Collective, we have made, because here we actually did something that was related, because they say, we know what we value and we know what we want to pay for. So we've actually made an economical model that is based on the descriptive analysis, where we can predict what they want to pay by looking at the descriptive analysis and the correlation, linear regression used on the price that they pay per coffee. And that's something I'm going to present next week in Hamburg with Peter Dupont from Coffee Collective. But there's another. I just want to show you how the data looks like from a real sensory descriptive analysis. And this is actually a really interesting data set because it's a data set made on coffees grown in a greenhouse in Copenhagen at University of Copenhagen. So it's different types of coffee grown under the exact same conditions. It's different genetics. So you can see here in sensory descriptive analysis, you have different ways of looking at the samples. You have first something called a PCA, principal component analysis. That is kind of in this case, a two-dimensional correlation analysis, visual analysis, where you can see how does my samples correlate with the descriptors that we scored in this session. So you can see here, the blue ones are the samples, Robusta, F1 hybrids, the Brevibus, Liberica, Caturra, and Ethiopian heirloom. And here in this study, we had 6 samples, and we had 13 descriptors. And this was with the, 13 is too much. So we were lucky that there were big differences, because if there were not big differences with 13s, we wouldn't have got a conclusive. So this goes back to the power analysis. What is the expected difference or what is the difference that you want to find? So this is the budgeting, right? So we know that we were kind of flying a bit close to the sun with 13 descriptors. And then it makes a spider plot, and this is the p-value. The p-value fundamentally is the quality of the data set at hand. So you need to know if you got a conclusion out in the other end. And here you can see this is an ANOVA test that just calculates the probability that across all the samples for this descriptor, does it look like the shift in mean is bigger than the sample variation? And if it's bigger than the sample variation, much bigger, then you get a low p-value. And if it's below 5%, you think, okay, this is not a coincidence. The trends we see is not a coincidence. And so that's really the data quality. And you could see here that we got a lot of conclusive data, except the red berry and the sweetness and astringent and bitterness. So if you don't get good data, there can be 2 reasons. First of all, it might be that there are no differences, or it could be that the panel is not well calibrated for this. And as a sensory scientist, you want to know, right? Because you need good data. So the question, is it the samples or is it the panel? There are tools in the software to look at this, because you can look at the individual performance and the panel performance, and you can see if there are panel outliers. If there are, you can train them and you can do the experiment again, and then you get better data. Or you can simply exclude people who are just creating noise, and then you get good data. So integrated in the whole descriptive analysis is not only an analysis of the samples, but also an evaluation of the panelists. And that was the whole idea behind Ida's PhD, to reverse the binoculars and look at the individual assessors' skills rather than just the product. So that's the sensory performance course we have. We have this almost like a hearing test for the students. So you can so that you know what your weaknesses and strengths are. And then we have even a better plot to show for the different samples. You can see here, for example, it seems like floral is categorized. The samples has 3 different significant categories for florality. So you can see the Robusta has its own significance category. So this is a group compared to the others that, so the F1 hybrid, Caturra and Liberica, they are in another group when it comes to florality. So this is a way of looking at the samples. But as I said, we actually have really interesting data about the panelists as well, because you can see you get the same sample 3 times without knowing it, scoring the same descriptor on the same sample 3 times without knowing it. And the question is, how big of a variation do you have? So here you can see for assessor 280, there's anonymized so that I can show it without disclosing who it is. You can see here for each sample, you can see how well you can see here, for example, cereal and malt. This person is all over the place. This person gets the Caturra 3 times. Sometimes this person scored 0, sometimes 6, and sometimes 10. This person is not calibrated for cereal. This might, if we didn't get good data on cereal, this data might ruin it for us, this person. So either this person needs to be trained or kicked out. And then I've actually created, I told you you shouldn't create your own stuff, but I basically, in this software, I just created what I've seen at the universities the last 15 years. It's not for sale, it's not a commercial software, it's something I use internally during my courses. But it's 7,000 lines of Python code and a relational database that keeps track on every student and all the sessions. So I've created this, this plot. Well, I know if I said anything about people overcomplicating things, this plot might tear me down, but this actually makes sense because it's intensities and the person tasting the same sample 3 times in a row. So here we can see if people are just scoring the same all the time or if they are actually scoring the samples different, because that's the information, right? If they score different samples and or score them the same, they don't provide information. But if we can see if they get one sample always scored the same, another sample and they scored differently, that is discriminability skills. And then the variation is the size of the variation when they score the same. So that actually prepares for something called a PMSE plot. So here, for example, this person, you want to have a low variation and also a low p-value that shows that you have discriminability skills, right? So you want your individual descriptors, you want in the lower left corner. And so every time you are out here, it means you have high variation in the data. And if you are high on the y-axis, it means that you are scoring the samples the same, that you're not discriminating them. So here you can actually rank this is what the person don't need to train because this person is really skilled. Discriminability, low variation. And the upper right corner is the problematic. That's the descriptors that they should focus on. And you can do this across roast degree so that you can test people's ability doing this on different roast degrees, different roast timings, in this case on terroir. So you can test people's skills across different types of products. And then you can, of course, also, if you have a company, you can do a panel calibration analysis. So you can see here, for example, when it comes to cereal and malt, 282 and 35 and 280, they are outside the 2 standard deviation circle. So they need to be trained because they are using the scales differently than the rest. And this is an important thing. As a sensory scientist, and this is a big difference between the Q system, but I also think the new CVA system, that if you are teaching the Q system or the CVA system, the instructor is considered the yardstick for truth, or okay, I might be wrong there, but for the Q that was the case. As a sensory scientist, it's the panel average. You might have your own opinion as a scientist, but it's the panel average that is considered the yardstick for what is true or wrong. Yeah?
That's not true for CVA. That was for Q.
Okay, great.
I have another question. It's very interesting because at least
I
agree
need to
with...
go a bit closer so I can hear you. No, but it's not because
Okay.
that's for the line.
When we have descriptive analysis, indeed, we need to know the panel performance. It's mandatory.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
this is great. I'm from the R&D department, so we are able all the time running these type of things because we can see which panelist needs more training, which is great.
Yeah.
But my question is, in the reality, because also in the company we have other department. It is the green coffee trading or commodities. They are copying, I don't know, more than 100 samples a day. So when I try to put this into the reality, they don't want to do this, you know?
Yeah.
And probably I'm trying to see the CVA as an opportunity for more for trading than for the entire scientific point of view of evaluation. Because in our group, we have sensory tool books. As you mentioned, we have descriptive analysis, we have discriminant, because each product in coffee needs different things, and also each moment of the production needs different evaluations. So my question is how we can implement this performance in a fast-paced environment. It's just my question because I'm from R&D, but when I want to work with green coffee department is different. They have other pace and also they have other priorities. So this is more how I see it.
Yeah, I understand the question. And this, first of all, there are a lot of fast methods that I think could be used. But if the question is just who is skilled enough to participate, I think a triangulation sensitivity threshold test is fine. And that's another piece of software I've created where if you have 4 tables with 4 triangles, and on each table there's a known difference, for example 10 actrons, 20 actrons, 30 actrons, and 40 actrons, and they score them all, then of course you can see at what table sensitivity, because that's the first table where they have 4 out of 4 correct. But you can also do logistic regression on all 16, and then you'd actually get a decimal number of their sensitivity threshold, very precise. And you can do this across brewing, different types of green coffee processing. So I think triangulation is the best quick way for people to kind of just who is skilled and who is not skilled. Because this is of course a bit more elaborate, but I would say that the method of just kind of spreading the samples on a kind of flavor wheel, that's great for quick and dirty descriptive if you don't have time and resources for this. And triangulation is a great way of testing people's skills, also really fast paced. All right, I think the time is about to, this is another way of looking at panel calibration and who is off and how and so on. So the way that you can try this on, so to speak, we have integrated this as the 4-day roasting professional. I've taken out the theory and put it into an e-learning system. So the first day is actually a full day with both the discriminative and the triangulation test, so you get kind of a hearing test. And then we also run these 1-day sensory performance courses on site. But we've actually started to do it for people virtually, for people who's got a bullet and an Ikawa. Because then the trick is that they just need a friend or a colleague, and then I teach the friend or colleague to prepare everything, and then the person participating is just participating, and then I have an extended arm, which is the assistant. So we can actually do this virtually now for people with Ikawa bullet, and of course we'll extend this to more and more roasteries. So now we have started to do this virtually, so that this is the software where I can be present elsewhere virtually. So yeah, that was basically what I wanted to share with you. And of course, there's a little offer here. You can, if you scan this code, you will get to a page. The seat on a sensory performance course costs 300 euros. But on this page, you will get some bonuses. And don't worry about the dates, because what you purchase here is just a ticket that you can then later find what course days that suits you. And just by going in here, you'll also get actually the printout that you have in front of you. So just to sum up, we really want to bring science to the community with nothing added. That's the mission of Coffee Mind, because we really feel that people are wasting a lot of time with overcomplicated models that is not really suitable for them. So if the new CVA is not suitable for coffee roasters, and that's the topic here, that's a good thing to get clarified, but that should perhaps also be a bit sharper than in the communication from SCA. Because it seems like this is sensory science, but if it's only sensory science for a small group, then it's not sensory science, because sensory science is really from the product to the final consumer. That's the whole point of it. That's the strength of it. And if it's only for a small group, then I think there's a bit of a skewed focus on how it should be kind of rolled out. All right, any questions? I think we are a bit over time, but Do you think this makes sense? Anything that could be clarified, or something that how to use this at home and so on?
I think
Yeah.
we have to think about the producer as well.
Sorry.
I think we have to think about the producer as well, because you have the roaster point of view, but we need to have the producer point of view. Is this CVA, or will this CVA help the producer to better sell the coffees? This is one of my main concerns, is to have the producer selling the coffee at the best price based on their quality. And I still think the CVA is going the right way. It's true that the affective is still something we have difficulties to explain. But is it
my point
better or not of the old form? Because the old form, for me, it's clear it's not adapted at all with the new post-harvest processes and the coffee we have now on the market.
I agree, but my point is, I think there's faster and cheaper ways to get relevant consumer data for the producers than having a form where I'm not even sure about the data quality we get out. I think we should just have sensors around the world where we get consumer data by somebody who is planned to go there, and then have a map, and then we could kind of have some examples and show the producer, this is the coffee that in Japan, this is how it tastes, right? Taste this and understand this. So this would be, but the CVA is kind of trying to make a small army of people who's making questionable quality data. I know that there's a form and there are intentions, but what's the quality of data? I would be much more comfortable by investing in sensors around the world who will gather local measure electrons, what's the frequency of naturals and so on, and then have some tasting kits for the consumers to, this is what they like in Korea, this is what they, because the data, that it doesn't tell the consumer anything, or the producer. So for the producer to understand, they need to taste it. And then I think that we need to make sure that the quality of the data is better than somebody who's got a one-day training and create a lot of noise. That's my worry. So I think it's our responsibility to make sure the data are good, and then it needs to be research projects carried out by people who are hired to do so, and not spreading a system where it's really because of course we get data, but what's the quality of the data? Are they conclusive? What is it? Because you remember the evidence hierarchy, bias and confounding factors. If you have a non-controlled data collection or only a semi-controlled data collection, there are millions of bias and possible confounding factors, and then the producers get no data. So I think that it should be done by somebody who under control, because then we'll elevate it to what sensory science is. So if we believe that we can make some forms, have somebody fill them out, and we get good data, I've just had too many inconclusive data sets to trust that that is a body or a vehicle to get good data for the producers.
I just want to, I've said a few things in this meeting, but I just want to say what you just said about collecting consumer data and this idea about having centers in places. I totally agree with you that now is the moment that we can collect much more consumer data. And I actually don't think we need centers to do that, because we've got these. We've got consumers that can give feedback on sensory experiences in a increased,
but who serves it for them?
So anyway, but I just agreed with you that we should collect consumer data, final consumer data, let's call it. And I totally agree with you that the point here is to be helping producers sell their coffee. And this gets to the conversation that we just had a minute ago. The reality is coffee producers don't sell, given the current market structure, the coffee producer does not sell their coffee to the final consumer. They sell their coffee to intermediaries. And this is probably maybe the confusion that we're run into. The CVA is designed for the intermediaries. It's a cupping form, essentially. And the cupping system is used by exporters, importers, and coffee buyers. That's what the coffee value assessment is designed for. Now, it's designed, the reason we used hedonic scales on the effective part, so the assumption is that a coffee buyer will have effective judgments. They will be able to do a good job at describing the coffee. That's the descriptive assessment. And then their effective assessment is to estimate the market value of the coffee, estimate what consumers are going to value about the coffee. It's another step to, as you pointed out, to see if the cupper, if their judgments are aligned with consumer judgments. And that's what we need consumer data to do.
Yeah, so I would say for that to work, you would need to already, and as part of the thing, have a very rigid system on how coffee buyers can test if their assumption about their consumers are true.
Right. From a scientific perspective, you're right. In a reality perspective, that's what they do in their market every day. That's
But I don't buy that, Peter, because I've been doing a lot of, and you know also all the research we've done, consumer studies with behavioral economics. Do not assume, that's anti-science. Science is data. In God we trust, everybody else bring data, right?
What's that?
In God we trust, everybody else bring data.
Right.
So assumptions is not science.
Yeah, I mean, science is something that you do. It's a philosophy. It's an experiment. The CVA is a tool that's based on the principles of sensory science that is applied in a market environment. Just like Coffee Mind's tool is inspired by sensory science and is applied to a trade. I mean, Morton, you say you don't invent things. You invent a lot. You've invented your flavor wheel and your system.
Yeah, but the flavor
and your
wheel,
software.
I wouldn't claim that's scientific.
No, but I think that's good. I think those things are good. I think that the flavor wheel, either yours or the SCA's, is an infographic of descriptive terminology that you can use in a cupping room.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's inspired by sensory science. The cupping, whether it's the SCA's cupping form or Coffee Mind's
My
cupping
point is
form.
just that sensory science is engineering, and there are some principles that are dangerous to twinkle with, and because then you don't put on your seatbelt before driving if there are things from a scientific point of view, and that can be done much simpler. But let's just, I think we need to kind of finalize now. Any comments or questions?
I just want to do a last comment. I remember one of my statistics and sensory professor at the Zurich University. He always said that sensory science doesn't explain the success of a product. So you can develop a better Coke than Coca-Cola. You will never have the same success than Coca-Cola because the price, the logistics, and other factors will influence the success of the good. So don't expect the sensory science to predict the success of the food of your product. So it's not my word, it's my professor's words, and I still have his word in my mind.
You need to come with the business model, and then sensory science can help you get there. But you need to come with a business model. Yeah. Let's call it a day. Thanks for coming. I hope that it was enlightening. And thanks for coming, Peter. I appreciate it. I'm sure nobody dares to ask a question because I speak for an hour per, per question. So let's just go to the exhibition and keep it. Oh, do you have a question?
Yeah, I would really like you to summarize this because I feel like this is one of the crucial hearts of.
Okay, yeah. So basically, and that was that the sensory is only dealing with the things, right? So this is my favorite philosopher, Ken Wilber. He's talking about psychology, culture, things, and systems. And this is the vehicles through which you provide value. So for example, you can, if you are in a cafe where they make you a perfect coffee, but it's late, right? That's the systems that you don't have. If you have a perfect green, but you don't make sure that as a green coffee buyer, your logistics is, then you're not providing value in that. It might be a perfect coffee, or it might be a perfect coffee on time, but served by a rude barista. Or it's a place you don't want to be seen. That's the cultural, right? If you don't want to be seen amongst hipsters because you're too old like me, then I might like a coffee somewhere, but I don't go there because I don't like the crowd. Or if I want to be seen by hipsters, with hipsters, I would go there, right? So you've got psychology, culture, systems, and things, and sensory science is only dealing with the things, right? So I think this is because this is also one of the things I think with the value as perceived by the consumer, right? This is and this is where I think just looking at intrinsic and extrinsic, that's not taking the whole systems part of it. And the systems is actually what we struggle with businesses. We're not systematizing things enough.
And it complicates it in exactly the way that you started this lecture.
Yeah.
Adding the layer of value, which philosophers since Plato have been arguing, what is value?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an evolving concept in humanity.
Yeah.
And for this system to think they can take that on and layer value on top of the sensory is to me the complication. And then ask for it to be in the market and to base trade on this that is now become the geocentric, and to ask producers to price their things. Does the producer price it first? What is price and value? I mean, these are huge questions that this claims to solve, but it doesn't. Just because there's a sensory attribute that I find valuable and I like, and then the producer says, oh, well, you value it, then I want X amount of dollars, and they go, well, I don't value it that much.
Yeah.
So at that point, this is where it doesn't function for the purpose, even a green buying purpose. It doesn't function. And I love your focus on the sensory. Just focus on the sensory. Don't do this.
Yeah.
Don't try to be everything for everyone.
Yeah, and then
solve
when you
every
kind of
problem
talk
in the
about that, then
coffee
what we're
industry.
not everything for, it's only green buyers, but but
It's a big, you nailed this exactly with the rocket visual.
Can I add something?
yeah.
I mentioned that I'm a scientist, but also I'm from Colombia. So my heart is divided because I hail from the producer country. So I recognize that always in the life, even in coffee, we are looking for a silver bullet that works for every product, but it's not true. But I'm speaking for coffee producer side. So it's very important that coffee change how it's seen, at least in the coffee, in coffee producer countries. Because I've been digging into CVA just for fun. It is not part of my work. Because I'm completely committed with the community. So I test a CVA with coffee producers, and now, this is not a spoiler, but it's not my work. I work with some students, and they have the possibility to connect China with Colombia in trading online using CVA, because at the end, right now, the coffee producer knows how takes their coffee with this CVA, not just on a score, because at the end of the day, the coffee producer needs to sell all coffee, not just specialty coffee. I know that we are here from specialty coffee, sorry, but it's the really life. So when we have the CVA or the descriptive and we have the nutty flavor, probably the floral that is more for Chinese market is good because they are selling part of their production. But also we can run, which is the suitability.
Suitability.
Yeah. And also say, okay, probably it's for expectation, experience, and otherwise. At the end of the day, my reflection is that we need to have a sensory toolbox because a hammer is not enough for the things that we need to do when we are doing a construction or a building. This is my reflection, and thank you so much for come up with other point of view.
Great. Thank you very much. Before you leave, I've actually brought some Coffee Mind Flavor Wheels posters. If you want, I can just put them here, and you can go and get them. But otherwise, I think we are about to be done.
Du skal være ved bullet om et kvarter.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, but Morten needs to be at the bullet in 15 minutes. He's presenting over at the bullet roasters. So busy man. Yeah. At the base.
So thank you very much for coming. And please take a flavor wheel if you want. And thank you very much for supporting this. Thank you. Great.
Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
I hope that you'll launch the course online, but using the link, the Nucus link. Is in your mind?
Yeah. I'll spread, but I'll start with the Bullet in Ikawa because I've been working with those companies for 10 years, and so it's easy for me to. But of course, this is something I want to be available for all brands. So I'm taking. But it takes time to.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm not rush. I'm just following your research and all the things you do and try to rethink the things, just for be now more.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming.
Well known organizations say that we take truth. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I really loved that Peter was here. That was amazing. So,
Cool. Well, congrats and
thank you. See you later.
see you later.